Hi, I'm Carolina Nocetti. I'm a physician and cannabis technical consultant, and you're listening to Professionally Cannabis. Olá, meu nome é Carolina Nocetti, eu sou médica e consultora técnica em cannabis e você está escutando Professionally Cannabis.
Where do they go, the smoke rings I blow each night?
Hello, listeners, and welcome back to another episode of Professionally Cannabis. I'm your host, Oscar Houseman, and with me, of course, is Jonathan Weiser. And today, well, what's going on today, Jonathan?
Well, today, I'm really happy to say that this week's episode, we had a chat with Carolina Nocetti, who is the founder of Intercan, which is an international cannabis academy based out of Brazil.
Yes, she was an absolute believer in the plant. In fact, I think we have a little clip that I'd like to run in the middle of our intro, which is something a bit new and spicy for us, because she gave us this piece after we'd officially concluded the interview, but it was just so good and impassioned.
I would like to ask for the listeners to take a stand on this topic of cannabis being used medically. Everybody listening here has someone close with the diagnosis of autism or pain, Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease, cancer, anxiety, insomnia, and other indications that cannabis might be beneficial. So I ask that everybody here is an agent for change and share this podcast with people that need to hear this information and share information about the benefits of these plants, and everybody here can make a difference in people's life. You don't need to be a physician to save a life. If you share the information, if you share this podcast, you will also be part of this network of professionals from all types of backgrounds that are looking for to save lives in a sustainable manner.
Well, listeners, I think that gives you in a nutshell the passion and hard work that Carolina brings to crystallizing this mission. So, Johnny, if it's okay with you, I think we should just dive into the interview.
Let's go.
Where do they go, the smoke rings
Today,
I
I'm
blow
delighted to say that we'll be getting a first-hand account of the current cannabis state of play in Brazil in our conversation with Dr. Carolina Nocetti, the founder and medical director of Intercan, the International Cannabis Academy. With direct insight into how cannabis is reaching patients in Brazil and wider Latin America, we can't wait to get this chat started. Carolina, great to have you with us on the Professionally Cannabis Podcast.
Thank you, Jonathan, for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here.
And thank you for joining us. So, Carolina, what led you to the plant?
In fact, the plant was led to me. I didn't have any knowledge of the plant or its potential benefits. I spent 10 years in the United States after I graduated medical school. And during my medical boards, the USMLE boards, I was studying many hours a day, sometimes 14, 15 hours. And I would get home and have some difficulties to eat and sleep. So I was prescribed Zolpidem, which is also called Ambien in some countries. And this is a sleeping pill, and it was extremely effective. In fact, it was so effective that I was kind of concerned to take this a second time. And I was afraid to get chemical dependency on this drug. So I was looking for alternatives that were safer for me to use on a daily basis. And a colleague, a physician, mentioned about medical cannabis to me and asked if I have thought about it. And that's how cannabis came to my life. I made a face, likely I made a weird face to this colleague. The fact that he was so smart made me think about it. So it gave me a drive to sit down in the computer and put cannabis into the search. engine. And to my surprise, I came across scientific research from the very talented Cristina Sanchez from Spain, talking about a THC study with the potential for cell apoptosis in cancer cells, which is a suicide of cells, is the best way to kill a cell because you decrease the inflammation around. So if you can compare with chemotherapy would be, let's say, a grenade, and cannabis would be a laser kind of gun. I couldn't believe my eyes because I was doing the US Assembly boards. Those are very hard to pass. And nowhere they mention cannabis as a potential therapy. And the more I study, I saw this like almost 5,000 years history of its use medically. And I also find a long list of possible disease indications. And the most impressive part, more impressive than the plant itself, was the cannabinoid system. And I discovered that this system, it's older than the central nervous system. So there is so there is an organism called Hydra. So Hydra is a 600 million years old organism, and this organism is very simple. It has gastro system, so it can eat, and this works fine, and they have a peripheral nervous system, but Hydra doesn't have a central nervous system, but it does have an endocannabinoid system. So this is what made the neurons to talk to each other, because the endocannabinoid system is also a signaling way of communication. And I was very impressed by that. So I started studying. I was in a state of shock for a few days after this Cristina Sanchez study. And I was asking everybody. I couldn't believe that people didn't know that. I couldn't believe that people were not protesting in the streets to have this access to this plant. And when I was trying to analyze how we got to this difficult situation on access, I discovered there was a lot of hurdles in terms of politics and lobby strategies and whatnot. And then it wasn't a medical decision. It was just a financial, political decision that was made to ban this plant off the planet. So I started analyzing the challenges of this ecosystem. And the first thing I identified was the products were very hippie-like. They weren't serious at all. It was like very funny names going around, the strains and the products. And just thinking like with my physician hat, I wouldn't feel comfortable to sit down and write a prescription of, I don't know, orange cat or something like that. There's like some crazy names around there between gorillas and cats and monkeys and crazy names. None of them would fit the language and the seriousness that a physician office stands for. So another point that I saw, so first of all, the marketing itself, like the branding, was wrong. And I realized the physicians weren't getting involved in the picture. First of all, physicians are horrible business people. And second of all, they are just so busy and they are so focused on what they are doing that it's very hard for them to incorporate new things if this is not in their plan.
Well, a lot to unpick here, and I'd like to kick off with the education piece. Now, as someone who has been a medical student, you've studied medicine, how did you feel that topics surrounding cannabis, its interaction with receptors, its medicinal possibilities, had been totally omitted and not included in any of your educational syllabus?
Still very surprising for me that this subject is not in medical schools. The education in cannabis and the patient care are points that are hard for physicians to understand and to absorb into their clinical practice. The system is very important because it modulates other physiologic systems in our body. And a very interesting thing about the endocannabinoid system is that this promotes something called homeostasis, which is the equilibrium of the body functions. And this is an important feature that this system has. So we are starting to see educational efforts, and those educational efforts in universities are pressuring the system to include this into the graduation schedule. So Hagendale is a publication, those are authors for pharmacy book, a pharmacy book that is very famous in the life of many medical students. And they now have a chapter that speaks about the endocannabinoid system. So I do believe that soon the universities will need to include, because the students will ask for it. So now there are universities that are putting post-graduation courses, they are doing master programs, and also just like regular cannabis education outside of their graduation programs. So little by little, this is going to move forward and allow people to be educated in a professional sense, because if we don't have this in universities, we are going to take much more time to make this plant accessible to all patients that need it.
So following on from that, what's the patient experience like for Brazilian patients? Are they accessing flower? Are they accessing oils? What does it look like who even is allowed to get prescriptions? Perhaps is a good starting point, but I'm quite unfamiliar with the Brazilian system, and I'd love to know who's able to get prescribed, what are they able to get prescribed, and what sort of doctor is doing the prescribing?
In Brazil, prescription is still a gray area. We have two entities that are involved in access of medical cannabis. One is called Anvisa, which is the Brazilian version of the FDA, and the other entity is the Federal Medical Council that regulates what physicians can and cannot do. But within the Federal Medical Council, there are two regulations that speaks different languages. So one of them says that only neurologists and psychiatrists can prescribe CBD products, so high CBD products, no THC, or they don't even mention THC, for intractable epilepsy of children and adolescents. But we do have another regulation that is called the Physician Act. That means that physicians have liberty to make autonomous decision with their patient in regards to their health. So those two different regulations, let's say, they don't speak to each other, because if there is the Physician Act and if you have autonomy to make safe decisions with your patient, then the first one that says only neurologists and psychiatrists, it goes down the drain. So now the physicians that are prescribing are from all specialties. All physicians, even general practitioners that don't have residencies, up to oncologists and rheumatologists and any specialties that have interest in prescribing this product. So all based on this Physician Act. In terms of what product can be prescribed, there are two regulations. One that describes what can be sold in pharmacies. And in pharmacies, just oral in an oil form or intranasal, which we didn't understand very well why they would go that route. There is no intranasal product so far in the pharmacies. There are two products being sold. One is very similar to Epidiolex, and the other one is Sativex. And we have another regulation that is a direct importation, which is in place since 2015. People can import different types of methods of administration of this medicine. So oral, let's say capsules and oils, intranasal, topical, but we cannot have flowers. So no vaporization is allowed, no flowers are allowed.
Intranasal, I've never heard of that. Was that based on lobbyists asking for it, doctors asking for it, patients, or do the regulators in Brazil sort of concoct their own conclusions?
Yeah, we doubted that they make this decision on their own. And as we're talking about a country that is so corrupted, we think that likely this was a lobby effort. Maybe there is a company that has a product and they saw this as an opportunity, but we are not sure. We will never be sure. All we know is that no, there is no products available in the market yet for intranasal use. But we do have a patient association in Brazil that they have an intranasal product. Is an oil. It's an oil-based product. It's not like with use of a propellant, which is usually like water-soluble propellants that are used for this kind of medication. We don't see it. We haven't seen it. I've seen intranasal products in the US, so I know this is not out of nowhere, but in Brazil, we still don't have this, and we are not sure why they chose it. Coming into this topic, and I think it's very interesting regarding the products that I would like to add, is that the possibility to import rescue products. So in my clinical practice, 100% of my patients, they use cannabis. And I decided to niche because this is the only thing I do in life is cannabis. Just not only helping the patients, but helping the physicians. So in my clinic, I do have a B2C side, taking care of patients live and online. And we do have a B2B side where we implement this intelligence of patient care in physicians' office and clinics and hospitals, because we saw that physicians, they want to do it, but they want to hold someone's hands while they make it happen. And that's the idea here. And one thing that we are seeing a great result in the clinic is the use of a combination of maintenance products with rescue products. So, for example, patients that have anxiety or patients that get aggressive, like autistic patients and Alzheimer's patients, and they need a solution right now, the maintenance products, which is a regular extract, it might take an hour and a half to make an effect. So we cannot wait. A mother has an autistic child or an epileptic child that is convulsion, having epilepsy in front of you. They cannot wait for 1 hour to make an effect. So so rescue medications, it's a great relief. It decreases the anxiety of those mothers and caretakers because something that acts fast. So here in Brazil, we are using liposomal products and nanotechnology. In the US, vaporizing products are an option. They're good rescue products. And we have a patient association here in Brazil that has the intranasal products that patients with intractable epilepsy are using during the crisis to manage the convulsion.
So, as a prescribing clinician in Brazil, when you have a patient that comes through the door and you're thinking that there's a certain product that would be most suitable for them, now is there a central repository somewhere in Brazil where there are certain products that you're able to prescribe to them and they're able to access them from this repository? Or are you able to put in bespoke orders for products outside the country to bring them in for particular patients? Now, that's the first question. And the second question, it's slightly different to that, but also linked. Would I be right in saying that a particular quirk of the Brazilian legislation is that prescribing clinicians with regards to cannabis and cannabis-derived treatments have to take personal liability for the prescriptions that they are making to patients?
Access of cannabis products in Brazil is a challenge because we do not have a central repository of products. And you'll be surprised to know that this is a guerrilla access here. This means that we do not have this in stores where you readily get it. We do have 2 products in pharmacies right now. The second product that arrived in pharmacies is a high CBD product, but we have 0 full spectrum products available in pharmacies in Brazil. So to bring a product, it's in a 1-by-1 basis, which means physicians prescribe the products. This prescription is sent to Anvisa, which is our FDA. This is analyzed, and authorization to import the product is issued in the patient's name. It's a person authorization. The product comes to Brazil by order. So it's not cheap for Brazilians to purchase it. Like the exchange rate here is very unfavorable, especially when you're talking, these patients are purchasing in dollars. And they bring 1-by-1. So if they order for 2 months, they bring it for 2 months. And this makes the access very expensive because you're paying courier services huge amounts of money for an international shipping. Every time you need a product, you cannot bring a container of full spectrum products and store anywhere in Brazil. It's illegal. And the 2 products are isolates as we stand. Regarding personal liability, the answer is yes. Patient and physician, they make a verbal agreement that this is a decision that they're making together. So if anything happens, the physician will answer it, because in Brazil, when you have a product that is being sold in pharmacies and they have specific disease indication and something happens, this is the pharmaceutical company liability. But if you're using the product that is registered for another indication, then this is the physician responsibility if anything happens. And more so in the products that are being imported, because they are not even protected by this regulation of products being sold in pharmacies. So unfortunately, physicians are very much liable for anything that happens with this patient. And in Brazil, it's not very common for physician insurance. So this would be a direct liability for them.
To take the questions on to the current situation and maybe a little bit of future forecasting, although that's always difficult even before we reach 2020. How many patients are there in Brazil, and do you think the numbers will grow? What's the total patient population that there could be there?
In Brazil, we have currently around 8,000 patients with authorization to import. We do estimate that the number of patients that are not accounted in these governmental agencies is much bigger for the illegal market. But this is the official number from Anvisa, and it's around 8,000 patients. And this is very low if we consider that the country has 210 million people. We are the 5th biggest country in the world, and we only have around 1,500 physicians prescribing.
And do you see those numbers increasing, or rather, what are the bottlenecks to seeing a patient percentage rate of something similar to, I don't know, Canada, where you've got 1%?
Yeah, it's a large country, 210 million people here. Bottleneck in general, not just in Brazil, is therapeutic strategy. So is teaching physicians how to manage this therapy, because this is personalized. Physicians are used to one capsule 3 times a day. That's what we are used to from our medical education. So having a product that each patient has a specific dosage is a challenge. So the numbers are not larger because physicians are not getting educated fast enough. This is one of the bottlenecks. The second bottleneck is because Brazil is a very conservative country. Although we do have carnival here, and you see many people in the streets having fun, and it looks like it's very progressive country. It's not. In the society in general, cannabis is perceived extremely negatively, mostly because the activists everywhere, they didn't wear a white coat. Maybe they were perceived not in a serious manner. So just right now, in the past 2-3 years, that they're seeing the face of cannabis changing. And the reality is, cannabis can have many faces, but for some patients and some politicians and physicians, the face of cannabis needs to be something that they feel familiar with for them to buy this idea. So the growth rate today in Brazil, the growth rate of the market is 138% growth a year. So it was more before, but now this is the average for last year for growth of number of patients. So if we have more education for physicians and patients, I believe that those numbers would grow much higher.
And one of the things I'm keen to touch upon is the political landscape in Brazil. Now, relatively recently, laws and legislation around cannabis medicines were relaxed and opened up. And actually, for folks looking into the Brazilian market, they might be surprised to hear that this actually occurred under the Bolsonaro government, which is traditionally seen as quite right-wing. Would you be able to give us an overview of the current political climate with regards to cannabis medicines? And are there any expected developments with regards to changes in legislation that might pave the way to increase access for more patients in the country?
It's very ironic that was during a right-wing government that we got 2 regulations passing that facilitated access to medical cannabis in Brazil. We saw this happening in the US as well. I was still living there when Trump got elected. I was in Los Angeles. I remember people crying, and it was very tough. And people were very excited for that day because that was the day for the prop to be voted that made cannabis okay to be sold recreationally. And in Brazil, we saw that when the right-wingers started buying this idea, like in the US, the leaders of the Republicans started investing in medical cannabis companies. That's what changed the landscape in the US. So it wasn't something just the Democrats were talking about. This is an issue that the Republicans were purchasing stocks on those companies, and especially in Kentucky, and everything changed. In Brazil, we saw something similar happening. The right and left wing politicians started holding hands. And I was just so surprised to see politicians from extreme sides of this scale talking about cannabis together. It gave me goosebumps many times because I wasn't expecting to see a topic that they both would agree upon, especially in this, let's say, polarized scenario that we have building up everywhere. So finally, we found one topic that people agreed on, which was cannabis. Surprisingly, was a great surprise. But yes, during this government, although this is a conservative party, they are liberal in economics, in the economic sense. They're conservative in their cost, in the way that they deal with their life and their religion, maybe the way that they express themselves. They are conservative, but they are liberal economically. Thus, they found a way to accept this. Our president is very vocal about things. That,
he is.
Well, about everything. Brazilians and Americans are suffering so closely. It's because I still work with American companies, so I'm always looking into the politics in the US, and it's exactly the same thing, guys. It's like the same challenge of people saying that what they shouldn't say. They should just stay quiet most of the times. But because this is a very vocal party or very vocal government, if they were against it, we would already know. And because he is not verbalizing that he's against cannabis, by default, we believe that he's okay with it, especially because we have a new regulation that allows cannabis to be sold in pharmacies, and we have a regulation that facilitated one that was written in 2015, that now is a bit easier, might be a stretch, but it's easier to access cannabis with this regulation, the second one. And politically, in House of Representatives, this is an ongoing discussion. So last year, I was called for a public hearing on the Senate. I felt that the senators were very open to hear the message from physicians. I wasn't the only physician there. There was a couple other physicians in this public hearing. The questions were very pertinent. I saw that they wanted to support this cause. And then I was a couple times called in the House of Representatives to discuss. One was in the Agricultural Committee, which is a very conservative committee, and they were the one calling for the public hearing. I thought it was very good. And we now have in the House of Representatives an official committee on cannabis commercialization. And I'm very excited with this project law, and I have high hopes actually, that this will pass. This is the first time I have hope since I came back to Brazil 2-3 years ago. And because the person that is sitting down to write it is a physician. We were so lucky. This is a respected professional. Besides being a deputy of the House of Representatives, he understands the patient's pain. So we finally in a place where this have all the potential to move forward. They will consider cultivation by patient associations and companies, and also access for pets. They will just not write personal growing, personal cultivation, or domestic cultivation. This is out of the law, but maybe in a secondary moment. But we are in a very good moment. Although this is a right-wing party, they are letting us move forward with this agenda.
I'm interested that it was called the commercialization of cannabis. Does that mean that there's any plans for adult use or recreational in Brazil?
I don't foresee recreational cannabis being a reality in Brazil because Brazil is a conservative country. A good portion of the politicians in the House of Representatives are from a religious background, and these groups do not accept cannabis as a recreational drug. So no, I don't foresee it.
Now, perhaps moving away from Brazil and looking at sort of the wider Latin American region, could you give us some insight into the approach of some of the other countries in the surrounding area? I know you previously have done some work around the Paraguayan market, for example. Would love to hear more.
Yeah, I was very happy with the opportunity to meet governmental officials in Paraguay. They are leading one of the most effective ecosystems for cannabis in the entire world. They will be the China of South America, and they will allow both cultivation and exportation of products. So the government there has thought about the economic sense and the social part of this ecosystem. So, for example, a percentage of production must be given to Paraguayans for free. And this is so important to help the population. And they are having this care while stimulating economically the country. So they have given between 10 and 12 licenses so far in Paraguay for different countries. Only one of those licenses is from a Brazilian company. Everything else is for Paraguay and countries around. One important point there, why I'm meaning that this is the China of South America, is because of the price. So a large portion of the pricing of a cannabis product comes from labor costs and energy. Paraguay has been a liberal country for the past 60 years. So we only had there a couple years of a left politician running the country, and he couldn't even finish his course. So having a liberal country means that the labor costs are extremely low, which facilitates, or when you're talking about decreasing the largest part of the expenses on production of cannabis products. And also energy in Paraguay is 70% less the cost of the energy in Brazil, just so you guys have a comparison. So those two parts of the cost structure of a cannabis products is going to be much lower. And I'm very excited with their projects because so far there is no exportation of cannabis in South America. It's not that it's not allowed. They don't say it's prohibited. Probably in the next few weeks, this might change. But there is only one company in Colombia that has the possibility to export. But since they don't have a regulation for the exportation, they have their hands tied. So that means that they say, yes, you can export if you follow the regulation. And then you ask, where is this regulation? They say, oh, well, we don't have it. So Uruguay is facing the same issue. They are having a few discussions in the past couple weeks between the association for the business there, for cannabis business, and the government, because many companies are failing in Uruguay because they have a lot of production sitting there and they cannot export. The Uruguayan market wasn't made for local consumption. This was very clear. And how they can survive if exportations is not a reality. So countries are having difficulties moving forward, especially because of the lack of exportation regulation so far. But other countries are moving slowly. Chile, Peru, they're Argentina, but they're still slow. But the big star of this is Paraguay, of all places. They are doing amazing projects there because they have combined a social and economically sustainable project.
Unfortunately, that is all we have time for. So I'd like to say, Carolina, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure having you on Professionally Cannabis.
Thank you for inviting me. It was a pleasure to share some information about Brazil and South America.
Where do they go? The smoke rings I blow.
Well, listener, we hope that you enjoyed that episode. Carolina is a real inspiration and is bringing a lot of cannabis knowledge to thousands in South America, namely in Brazil. It was a pleasure to have her on, wasn't it, Oscar?
Oh, yes, she was a wonderful guest. And, well, I look forward to bringing her back on season 3 and hearing that she's got facilities all over the continent, maybe North America as well. I think she has the firepower to keep it going.
Absolutely. And if you enjoyed this episode or found it useful, I would implore you to please, like, share, and of course, subscribe to the pod. And in addition, if you're yet to have listened to our entire back catalogue, I wouldn't recommend doing it all in one day, but we have some real crackers in there from politicians, scientists, medical professionals, and of course, business leaders, many founders and CEOs, many good episodes in the back catalogue, and of course, many more to come.
Listeners, you have been implored.
Hello, please take me above, take me with you.